Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's EarthEcho International STEMExplore Virtual Career Connection featuring Carina Fish, PhD candidate and Ford Fellow at University of California, Davis, Bodega Marine Laboratory in Bodega Bay, California. My name is Casey. I'm a programs manager here at EarthEcho International, and we are joined today by one of our exceptional Youth Leadership Council members, Haley, and she is going to moderate tonight's live event. Here at EarthEcho International, we're proud to work with an outstanding group of young leaders who help drive our work to empower their peers around the globe to take an active role in protecting our planet. And Haley's a great example of that. Haley is a 19-year-old science student at the University of Melbourne, Australia. Here, she is hoping to major in ecology and evolutionary biology with a side focus in zoology, geography, and environmental politics. Recently, her environmental conservation efforts were recognized in the 2017 Margaret Andrews Memorial Prize for Leadership and Citizenship. So welcome, Haley. Take it away.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to see all of you. We are so excited to have students from all over the globe joining us as we learn about exciting and sustainable careers in science, technology, engineering, and maths, or STEM. This live event is part of EarthEcho's STEMExplore program that brings inspiration to life by telling the stories of dynamic female professionals in STEM careers during live virtual career connections. We want to thank our founding sponsor, United Technologies, for their support of women in STEM. Here at EarthEcho, we believe that youth have the power to change the planet. Visit earthecho.org to learn more about our programs. You can also access resources like STEMexplore's career profile videos, as well as tune in for upcoming live events just like this one. I'd like to recognize and thank STEMexplore's partner sites across the country and recognize those that are joining us today. First, let's get a hello from our friends in California at the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Clarita. Hello, everyone. And hello to our partner sites at Coleman Park, West Palm, Florida, with Primetime Palm Beach County. Hello, West Palm. If you're here. We understand it's Parents' Night at Coleman Park, and we welcome all of you and your families. It's great to have our after-school partners join us today. And we want to also give a warm welcome to everyone tuning into our live streams. Just a reminder that you can send in questions for our STEM expert via chat, and we will break throughout today's presentation to see if you have any questions. Feel free to start typing questions in the chat space in YouTube or in the Zoom feed. We'll be sure to answer those as we go along. Now let's get started. I want to welcome our special guest for EarthEcho's STEMexplore Virtual Career Connections, Carina Fish. Greetings, Carina.
Hello, everyone.
Carina Fish is a PhD candidate in the Hill Ocean Climate Lab Group at the University of California, Davis Bodega Marine Laboratory. There she studies deep sea corals to unlock the stories they hold of modern and past oceanographic change. As a marine biogeochemist, Carina tracks human-induced changes to the deep sea by looking at the chemical composition of coral skeletons, their food source, and the water itself to illuminate how humans are impacting the ocean, and in particular, the waters below the surface. She is a NOAA Dr. Nancy Foster Scholar and the Ford Foundation Fellow, and she received her AB from Harvard College and formerly worked as a PH.D. dive master. Why don't you tell us more about what you do?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's great to be here. I am a marine biogeochemist, it's a mouthful, but if we break it down at the core, marine stands for my oceanographic work. So I work on the ocean and in the ocean. A lot of my stuff is actually too deep for me to be in the ocean anymore, but as a former PH.D. dive master, I used to love being in the water. So this is a picture of me aboard a ship back in August of 2017, collecting some of my samples. And in the background, you can see two of the robots that I used to go down to 2,000 meters. So that's the marine part, me studying the ocean. The bio part, I use animals to unlock the history of the past ocean. So in this picture here is a picture of a deep sea coral. And they are like the corals you might see on your tropical vacations, except they live without the sunlight. They don't have their algae friends or plant friends with them. And we'll hear more about them later. The geo part of my work is actually looking and using the tool sets of geochemistry, and that's looking at the past history. So anything that's beyond the modern day, say 400 years ago, like my corals, or even beyond that to centuries or millennia ago, we call that the geological history. So the geological history of the Earth is recorded in organisms and sediments and other environmental parameters that we can look at through chemistry. And that's the last part that I work on. So chemistry is my main tool set. It's actually the bread and butter of what I do. If I had to boil myself down to one science field, I'd be a chemist, and that's all. But as I talk about the questions I'm answering, they're both in the ocean and they're in the past, and they are on animals. You put the whole thing together, and I'm a marine biogeochemist. So again, the chemist part is me in a laboratory looking at the chemistry of animals to answer geological questions. So again, this is me aboard the EV Nautilus. It's an exploration vessel back in August of 2017. It's great because it also does a lot of live streaming to groups just like you. So if you have an interest of looking and doing some science communication with these live experts while they're on board, you can do that and sign up yourself. So for me, a lot of my work is actually on a ship to get my samples. And so a lot of what I do is on a moving vessel. So if you're okay with being in a moving car or on a ship that's moving and don't get seasick, this is a great environment for you. The other aspect of my work is also very teamwork oriented. So if you like playing basketball with your teammates, or if you like playing volleyball or any other team sport, this is a great field for you because a lot of our work is super expensive. So we need teams to come together to help make sure the whole project is going to be feasible and also well done and very, team oriented to make sure it's very successful out in the field. So this is a picture of me aboard the NOAA ship Shimada, and NOAA stands for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It is a government agency that oversees both the ocean and the atmosphere. And so here I am collecting water from a Niskin bottle. A Niskin bottle is just a tube with cap on the end of it, and we can send this tube all the way down to however deep we needed to go. In this particular case, it went down to 1,500 meters. It bottles up that water and takes it back up to the surface. And then we can analyze this water, and so that's why I'm sampling here with a smaller bottle to look at the chemistry of the water. But we don't want just one depth, we want multiple depths. So here is a rosette of 12 Niskin bottles. That means we have 12 different depths of water that we can analyze. So that's a lot of sampling, but it makes sure that we have a full water column from the surface of the ocean all the way down to the deepest depths. The average depth of the ocean is actually 3,800 meters. So part of the actual water processing, we have to rinse the bottle. And so this is me rinsing the bottle, and it's a lot of steps, but this is just one of them. And that's only one portion of my work. So the other portion of my work is on the actual corals. And coral animals are going to be living deep down, depending on where you are. And so to get there, you actually not only need the ship that we're on, but not one, but two robots. And so these robots are called remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs for short. This is me on board the EV Nautilus, and when we're controlling the robots, we're actually in a very dark shipping container. And so all the lights are out, and it's kind of like you're in a movie cinema, and then you have lots of different monitors, lots of different screens with pictures of different graphs and different video cameras, and it's all real time. So whatever the robot's seeing down at 2,000 meters depth, you are seeing in real time in that dark shipping container on top of the ship. This is what I am looking for at all times. The video of the coral. This one in particular is called a bamboo coral. And it's named because of two-part skeleton. It's one that's kind of like soft, and one that's like the seed.
This one's massive.
And this coral has two different records in one skeleton. The record of
Gary, how old do you
and the
think
record of water is two.
Come on. Take a guess. Take a good educated.
These animals are very slow growing. They are growing at millimeters per year. So they're like super, super slow growing, but they're also sometimes very old. So they can grow up to be 400 years old. And they're actually eating things that fall down from the surface of the ocean. So things that die at the surface then float down to them as food, and that's what they're eating. Now, so we might think that a lot of the corals might exist in tropical locations, but actually these corals are right off your own coast. So I know you guys are down in Santa Clarita, and you actually have corals right off the coast there. And so these corals are the ones that I've worked on. They're all the way from the Bay Area up in the north, all the way down to San Diego. And the corals are in deep water, but they're also cold water corals. So they're ones that are not like the ones you might see snorkeling. Now, this part was given away from earlier. They're actually pretty deep, and I described them earlier to be around 2,000 meters. There are some that go down even further to 3,800 meters, and some as shallow as 100 meters. So to give you an way to think about how many meters that is, if you think about a football field and you think about 13 football fields, then we're talking about around the same depth of these corals. So they're pretty far down there. And again, I keep referring back to these Florida corals, or the ones you see on your tropical vacations. And again, those guys would be more around 0 to 50 meters. And so there, a lot of the color from the sunlight can actually still reach them. And so that's why they have their plant friends with them. Now, the light can't penetrate that far down in the ocean. So the corals that we're dealing with are actually going to be on either seamounts or the walls of the slope. And so those are so far down, they don't have sunlight. And so they're actually just eating that food that falls from the surface called marine snow. So again, corals are animals, actually. They are not plants. And so this animal is up close, looks like this. These are pictures of the polyps, and they're the little things that actually can grab the food from the water and eat them. So for my science, for my research, I get to collect this coral, and I have to take the animal part away from it. So I take off the polyps with a scalpel, and it exposes this really beautiful skeleton. It's kind of like your bone in your finger. You have the white part that's kind of like the chalk that people write on the blackboards with. And then the black part, the organic node, that's going to be more like your fingernail. So that kind of like hard but still flexible material, that's exactly what it is. So let's look at that more. When I'm able to actually break apart this two-part skeleton, I'm mostly dealing with the fingernail portion, the organic node. And so this looks kind of like a tree ring or onion, depending on how you want to look at it. And it has different layers to it. And so if you peel it all the way back to the center, that is the oldest part of the coral. So it could be as old as 400 years. Whereas the outermost portion of the coral is going to be the most newest or most modern. So these layers, I have to peel them very carefully. If anyone likes to peel away the foil from the paper of your gum wrapper, that's kind of like what I do. I use tweezers and a scalpel to peel apart each and every layer. And then I get to actually analyze the chemistry of those peels. So this is like a picture of just one individual peel here. The other aspect that I'm doing is chemistry on the water. And so here I am using some poison to put it into the water sample that I just collected. And that's because there are microbes or microorganisms that are still using up the oxygen and changing the chemistry of the water unless you neutralize them with the poison. So we have to poison them first so they stop what they're doing. And it's just the chemistry of the water rather than the chemistry of that the organism is still changing. The other aspect I work on is extracting the carbon dioxide of the water to look at how old the water is. So there are some parcels of water that have been out of contact with the surface ocean for so long that they have a unique signature to them. So they have a radiocarbon signature to them that is distinct from when they were last in contact with the surface ocean. So I'm able to extract out the carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, and that tells me a lot about how old that water is. So the other part of it is once you have extracted the carbon dioxide, you have to run it through various steps to get it isolated from, say, the nitrogen and the other elements in the periodic table. And so I'm here extracting out just the carbon dioxide from the water. And then we finally get to run it for radiocarbon. So this is at another government facility. It's at a national lab in Lawrence, Livermore. And I'm able to analyze the carbon dioxide that was extracted and just analyze the radiocarbon for it. So of every element, there are some heavy of the version of it, and there's some light versions of it. So just like there is a average 7-year-old height, some 7-year-olds might be taller and some 7-year-olds might be shorter, but some 7-year-olds might be heavier or some might be lighter. And so carbon comes in a lighter version and a heavier version. So the normal weight of a carbon is 12, and the heavier versions are 13, which is still stable, and 14, which is radioactive. And so here we're measuring the radioactive carbon here. So the other aspects of our work, I just described my work on the water and the work on my corals and how the chemistry goes on both the corals and the water. But that's only one portion of my work. Once I'm done with my actual lab analyses, I'm doing lots and lots of reading. So here are some of the papers that I like to read, and I'm highlighting over and over again. I also code in R. So if you are a programmer or you like computers, then this is also great for you because we get to program in a language called R. There are other languages too, such as Python, but my favorite language is R. And then I'm also writing. So if you like reading and writing, being a scientist is pretty awesome since we're doing a lot of that. So here I am coding, reading, and writing. And the last part that we do is presenting. So we go to conferences with thousands and thousands of other scientists, and we showcase our work for them to give us feedback on it. So if you like getting your feedback from your teachers and from your peers, then this is also a great field for you. So to wrap up, I want to reemphasize that the marine sciences is not just marine biology. I know a lot of people might think when they think of marine science, automatically marine biology, but there's so much more to the ocean than just biology. So I focus on the chemical oceanography aspect of it, or the geochemistry and the carbonate chemistry, so chemistry heavy. But there are other ones like biological oceanography, which is different from marine biology. So marine biology focuses on the big animals in the ocean, and biological oceanography focuses on the plankton. So if you remember SpongeBob's evil character Plankton, he's the guy that biological oceanography is focused on. And there's also microbial oceanography, which is actually looking at even smaller things than plankton. It's the microbes. Then if you like to code or if you like to build things, there's also a field for you in ocean sciences too, and that's ocean engineering. So you're building the robots, you're building the remotely operated vehicles that I get to use to go down to 2,000 meters. Or you are using statistics to analyze all the data you get back from all the instruments that we put down into the ocean. So there's lots to go into that as well. And then if you like physics, the bread and butter of oceanography is actually physical oceanography, because if you think about the ocean, it's one large bathtub. But there's water masses moving back and forth and all around. So you have to track that water mass through time and through space. And that's usually done with physical oceanography. So if you think of tides or if you think of waves, that's all physical oceanography's bread and butter. The other aspect of my work is the geosciences. Again, so we're answering questions on the geological time scale. And the geosciences also has chemistry, biology, physics, and a lot of modeling with math. So there's different aspects of what you want to get into, but there's anything from plate tectonics, which is the movement of the North America plate versus the South America plate versus the oceanic plate that has Australia and New Zealand on it. There's so many plates that are moving around the Earth on the surface, and that's what we're living on. There's the geochemistry again, so using the tool set of chemistry and applying it to geological questions. That's where I fit in. There's also lots of microgeobiology, so looking at how life has evolved over time on Earth, so from millions of years ago to present day. And there's also climate modeling, so anything to do with climate change, you might have to model that in the future because we don't know what the climate might be in 100 years, so we can use models for that instead.
That's really, really, really awesome. And all those careers sound absolutely fantastic. So what's that sort of nitty-gritty process? How do we get to any of these careers?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of steps to getting to where you might be a professor. So the end goal might be a teacher at a college. And to get to that professor level, you first have to go to college after high school. And then typically you go to grad school. And grad school can either be for a PhD, a doctorate, or it could be for a master's student. Master's students usually also end up going to be a PhD student. So you can go straight through, or you can take a small step first with master's step. Once you graduate from your graduate school program, then you're on to being a postdoc. Some people can skip that phase and go straight to a tenure track position as an assistant professor. Once you've published a lot of papers, you move up from assistant professor to associate professor once you apply to your other colleagues, your other friends saying, hey, I would like to move up. I think I'm worth it. Can you evaluate me? And then once you've been there a lot longer, then you finally are a full professor. So it's a multi-process and it's very rewarding. But in between there, I would start thinking about maybe in college, start using your summers to set you up for your future. So one particular program is called an RAU program, and it's a research experience undergraduate. And this is great because even if you are a chemistry major or a physics major, you can specialize your summers to do research in areas that you're applying your knowledge to a particular question. And you get paid for it, which is pretty great. And you also get to visit other locations. So say you go to school in Southern California, but you want just a taste of New York. You can go to New York for a summer, get paid for it while you're doing research on a really cool question. And then if you can't wait for summer, or if you want to use your summer for other purposes, like traveling somewhere else, then you're able to actually ask your favorite teacher if you can work for them. So oftentimes you go to your favorite teacher who's teaching, say, if you love physics, go to your favorite physics professor, and you ask them, hey, do you have any research that you could use some help on? And most professors would always love some extra help. And so you're able to also work for them and learn a lot, but get paid as well. And so the end goal is, again, becoming a professor. And so the average salary might be anywhere between $51,000 on the low end to over $150,000. And if you don't want to go into teaching, you can also just be in a scientist at large, and that will be anywhere from $36,000 to over $111,000.
Awesome. Well, I think now it's time to check in with our interactive site to see if they have any questions today. Let's check in with our friends at the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Clarita. Do you have any questions for Carina? I see some hands. Might need to unmute the microphone.
And Santa Clarita, can you unmute your microphone so we can hear nice and loud? There we go.
Okay. All right. Can I go first, guys? Yeah. Okay. So I actually am planning on going to marine biology. So I wanted to, my major. But I wanted like in the animal sort of area, like working with animals. How many years would I be committing to that? And what I've been watching some YouTube that's like been this marine biologist, but I'm like not really sure if like that's what I really want to do. Like that's the area, because I want to explore the ocean and like travel, like that sort of thing. But I'm not sure if marine biology is that area.
That's a great question. Yes, the marine biologists, depending on where they are, they can travel, but oftentimes when you're working with animals, you have to care for them. So you actually have to be stuck wherever the animal is. So it's not always easy to pick up where you are and go travel because you have to care for your animal. So there are a couple of different paths you can take. You can just be husbandry, and that's kind of like same thing as a farmer on land, where you're taking care of the animal. And for that, you don't really even need to go to college. You could even just start working now in that line of field. Or if you want to do research on them, then you would have to go down the path that I just outlined, going to college, getting a master's maybe, and stopping there, or getting your master's and going on to a PhD. So it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to work with them and handle them, that's more just animal care and husbandry. If you want to ask research questions about the animals and what they do in different environments and different systems and different interactions, that's more research focused, and then that's going to be more academic focused. So it really depends on what you want to do with the animals. If you're still exploring, I would highly suggest you do some internships to understand what exactly the differences are. So maybe if you want to do animal care, you would intern at a aquarium for a summer and see what it's like to, shovel out all that poop and clean all the enclosed areas that they stay in. And to feed them on a schedule, they need to be fed twice a day probably, and making that happen even on holidays. So 4th of July, Christmas, all those holidays, they have to still be cared for. Versus if you're looking at the research questions, you can start looking at your favorite professor or research area and ask them questions and think about, what kind of things are you curious about, how they live and what they work on. Have you ever watched one of the BBC films? They kind of pepper that in a little bit into when they're showing those beautiful images.
Okay. Also, if I can jump in, if you are passionate about traveling, particularly for marine biology, I know in Australia there's lots of international research projects that you can apply for, and a lot of them will actually pay you to come to different places in the world and help them with research. And a lot of these opportunities would be available for passionate young individuals, particularly young women like yourself. So I would very much investigate volunteer opportunities, as Carina said, internships, but also international internships as well. Do we have any more questions?
How long does it take you to process all this information?
Can you say that again? Real nice and loud.
How long does it take you to get your degree in college?
How long does it take me to get my degree in college? It typically takes 4 years. I took 4 years. Some people can do it shorter in 3. Some people take longer, like 5 or 6, but the average length is 4 years.
Are there different kind of corals, like colors?
Yeah, there are so many different types of corals. So just like there are different people, there are different corals, and there are also different coral species too. So think of, there's not just one type of fish, there's multiple types of fish. And so the same thing happens with corals too. There's more than one species. And they have different colors, different shapes, different sizes, everything's different.
Would you be able to spot like the different corals?
Yeah, so sometimes you can definitely visually identify different corals, but sometimes they look so similar, they look like twins, but they're actually different. And the only way you can tell them apart is by looking at the tiny little way that they have different chalk-like portions of their skeleton, and their skeleton gives it away that they're different actually, but they're super tiny, so you actually need to look at them underneath a microscope.
Those are some really great questions. We do have another round of question time if you think of any in the meantime. We're just going to jump over to Casey now. She has a question on the online chat.
All right. I do have a question coming in from one of our YouTube viewers, and they're particularly asking about, Carina, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about when you're dropping that big device down for water samples. And I believe you said that there were 12 total that you could take. So they want to know, they assume, yes, that they can take those at different depths. And how is that possible? Are they triggered by something or are they timed? And I can bring that slide back up while you start answering that question.
That is a great question. So if you only have one Niskin bottle, you can send down on the wire a different weight. And so they can release it at a different time. So once you have that weight hit it, it'll release it, and then the bottle will close. That's normally if you have maybe maximum 3 bottles. In this case, you have more than that. So you have a full 12. And so what we're doing is actually we're back in a lab on the ship, and each one of, I can't point it out, but I'm sorry, each one of those strings that go back to the center of it can be triggered individually. And so we trigger them at particular depths that we want them to be at. And so one will trigger, and then another one will trigger depending on when we click the mouse button back in the lab. So it's all computerized at this point.
Very cool. So it is, you are manually clicking the mouse in order to trigger it, but they are physically triggered.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And great. Keep those chat questions coming, everyone. Haley, go right ahead.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm actually from the East Coast originally, from Boston, and I grew up there, but I also went to college there too. So I didn't really leave my 1 degree radius, 1 mile degree radius for ages. But when I was 16, I was a junior in high school. I had the opportunity to go to a semester abroad school in the Bahamas. It was called the Island School. It is a great experience. You're there for about 3 months, and you're immersed in the ocean life. So your history class is the history of the island. Your math class is celestial navigation, using the stars and the sun to tell where you are and to tell time. Your science class is the local ecology, so looking at both the ecology underneath the water, but also on land. It's very place-based education. So it's a phenomenal experience to be really immersed in an island setting. I also learned how to dive there. So it was my first taste of actually learning how to scuba dive and beginning my scuba career. So that was fantastic. But also I was able to, in other summers, take advantage of these programs. So in particular, I went to one in Missouri, and this is a STEM camp. And so we learned how to wire our own flashlight. And so we made our own flashlight, basically soldering together the different components. And that was great. We were able to do other projects that also emphasize either science, technology, engineering, or math. And that was just a 2-week camp. So that was a sleepaway camp during high school that I was able to do. And it was great meeting other youths who were also interested in science in different states from me. This is a map of everywhere I've lived. And so you'll see that mostly it was either in Boston, in the Bahamas, like I mentioned earlier, or now in California. But there's also 1 dot in New York City. And that is because after I graduated college, I wasn't ready to go into my PhD program yet. So I wanted some more time to make sure I was ready to commit the next 5 years of my life to studying a research question. So I wanted just a taster of that. And so I worked in a lab in New York City, and I was able to assess whether or not I was ready or whether I was so burnt out for the past 4 years of college that I still needed more time off.
That's really awesome. And again, really reinforcing that idea that there are so many different pathways and opportunities you can take to really discover where your passions lie. So Carina, here at EarthEcho, we really believe that we can act now for a sustainable future. Can you tell us how your job contributes to that sustainable future, and what do you really think is the importance of your career?
Sure. So if you zoom out to the 30,000 foot level of my career, I actually work on climate change. So we look at how the temperature, the oxygen levels, the carbon dioxide levels, everything is changing as there's more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere thanks to fossil fuel. And so when we think about the effects of that more concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's actually making its way into the ocean. And when it's in the ocean, it can actually change a lot of things too. And so my research looks at how those changes have occurred throughout time. So are we in a normal period, or has this been seen before? When we have seen it before, were humans alive? The answer is no, humans weren't alive when these changes have had to these levels back then. But it's understanding how the environment is changing, in particular how the ocean is changing in respect to different concentration levels of carbon dioxide.
It's really cool. So talking about climate change, that's really important to understand how our oceans are changing, and not just at a surface level, as far down as, you know, what was it, 1.5 kilometers sort of thing, to see how much our oceans are changing, even, you know, in the deepest parts of the ocean. So we're going to go back to our site-specific questions. Let's check back in with our friends at the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Clarita. Do you have any more questions for Carina?
Good.
Where do you travel?
Where do I travel? That is a great question. So when I was still a dive master working as a scuba guide, I was in Southeast Asia. So I was in Thailand, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. I was all over the place in that area and I loved it. But I knew I wasn't really using my brain. I was just really happy being in the water, but I wasn't actually mentally engaged. So then when I came back here to do my research, I was in Boston, New York, and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was for some of my research that I was doing. I was diving for a research, so I was able to both be in the water, but also use my brain. And that was for a 2-month period in Puerto Rico. And then I went to California, and the ships go from from San Francisco all the way down to San Diego. And so I'm on board a ship for about a couple of weeks per time, so maybe 2 to 3 weeks at a time. But then you get to present your work all over the place. So I've gone to New Orleans, I've gone to DC, I've gone back to New York for work, I've gone to Minneapolis, I've gone to St. Louis, I've gone to Los Angeles. So all over the place for presentation. And you can also go international too. So a lot of the instruments that we use sometimes only exist maybe 6 of them in the whole world. And so you have to go to one of those 6 sites just to run those analyses. So I've been lucky in that a lot of my analyses have been local, but some of them might take me to Hawaii pretty soon. And there's also one that's coming up that's in America Samoa.
And when you travel, when you test stuff, is it different? Like,
Yeah,
Different
so
what?
different areas when you like test the water, is it different?
definitely. So the temperature is different. Salinity, how much salt is in the water is different. So on average, the Atlantic Ocean is a lot saltier than the Pacific Ocean. And the oxygen is different. So the top part of the ocean has a lot more oxygen than the deeper parts of the ocean. And then the different chemical signatures like the nitrogen and sulfur and all those other elements, those all have different concentrations depending on where you are in the world.
Great questions. I think we've got one more question coming in from the chat. Casey, if you'd like to answer that one for me.
Yeah, so we do have another question coming in from the chat, and it has to do with the island school that you mentioned, Carina. How old were you when you participated in that, and how long was the study? I think, did you say it was over a summer?
Yeah, so I was 16 at the time, and usually the participants are 15 or 16. So they're either in their sophomore or junior year of high school. And then the traditional program is either the fall semester from September to December or from the spring. So I think it's from February to June. I didn't do the spring one, but I think those are the months. And then they've recently instituted a summer version of it. So it's more condensed, it's shorter, but it allows you to not take off from your actual school year. So say if someone played a sport all year round, they played 3 different sports and they really couldn't take off during the school year, they can try doing it for the summer year and the summer program instead.
Awesome. And that was the island school in the Bahamas. Great question. Haley, back over to you.
And just finally, do you have any advice for these young people as how they can contribute to a sustainable future?
Sure. So the number one thing is to vote. And since most of you probably aren't of voting age yet, I would say have conversations. So a lot of times we think about climate change happening to other people or happening way in the distant future, like 50 to 100 years from now, but it's actually happening right now. And so having those conversations with people who can vote, like your parents or your older siblings or your next door neighbor, and telling them about, the air quality in the SoCal during the wildfires. That's terrible, right? And so if you talk about them, the repercussions of climate change that are happening today, not tomorrow, not 50 years from now, but today, and how it's impacting your life, then you can start moving the conversation towards what can we do in legislation in Congress to actually make sure that we still have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, food to actually eat, because access to food really depends on access to clean water too. So those are the most important ways to work on a sustainable future. But another way to do it individually, if you think about ways to cut down your own carbon footprint, and sometimes that's really hard when you're so young and you don't have control over your own life. But instead of asking for more material things, for maybe a holiday season is coming up. So instead of asking for more toys and more consumer things, think about ways you can actually contribute to asking for less items, but more service. So maybe you want more quality time with your favorite friend who has now moved somewhere else, and you want to make sure you still have time to go swimming with them. So think about ways you can have experience maybe, rather than asking for more material things.
Well, thank you very much, Carina, and those are some great questions. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and a big thank you to Carina for joining us today. You can keep in touch with her and follow her on social media, and always feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd also like to thank the STEMExplore partner sites and classrooms that have tuned in live today, especially our interactive sites. EarthEcho also has some really exciting opportunities coming up. STEMExplore will continue to feature women in STEM careers with our virtual career connections in November and December. Again, feel free to visit earthecho.org to see our entire lineup and to register. And finally, be sure to stay connected with EarthEcho on our social media channels, as well as earthecho.org. Thank you again to our wonderful STEMExplore mentor, Carina Fish, and to United Technologies for their tremendous support of our programming. On behalf of EarthEcho International, thank you for joining us, and keep exploring. Bye, everyone.